Buckhead, Atlanta. Just hearing the name, it probably conjures up a certain image for you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Upscale, maybe.
Hmm.
Nightlife.
Exactly. Maybe shopping, maybe that vibrant scene. But, every place has a story that goes deeper, right?
Sure.
And you've given us some really fascinating pieces of that story. So our deep dive today is all about putting those pieces together.
Yeah, trying to understand the forces that really shaped Buckhead into what it is now.
We've got a couple of sources lined up.
We do. One takes us on a sort of historical tour, looks at key locations, buildings, places that really defined its character over time.
Okay.
And the other one, it's a research study. It looked at homicide trends in major U.S. cities, and Atlanta was one of their focus areas.
Interesting.
We should also mention one website you shared wasn't accessible. Happens sometimes when you dig into older stuff.
Right, the Digital Archaeology Challenge.
Exactly. So the mission really is to use what we do have to explore those pivotal moments and transformations that made Buckhead, well, Buckhead.
Okay, sounds great. So let's start at the very beginning. Where does the Buckhead story even kick off? The name itself sounds like it has a tale.
It really does. So the founding, generally it's attributed to Henry Irby back in the late 1830s.
1830s, okay.
And the name origin, it's quite something. According to Wright Mitchell from the Buckhead Heritage Society,
Yeah.
it goes back to this spot where Peachtree, West Paces Ferry, and Roswell Roads all meet.
Uh-huh.
Apparently, someone bagged a particularly large buck and, well, left its head near a bar right there at that junction.
Go away.
Yeah. As Mitchell puts it, that buck's head just became the namesake.
A literal buck's head. That's one you remember.
Definitely sticks with you.
And from that kind of rustic start, it really seems like Buckhead has changed, dramatically over the years.
Oh, absolutely. Richard Waterhouse, he's the executive director of the Heritage Society. He even calls it the Beverly Hills of Atlanta.
Wow. That's quite a jump from a buck's head and a roadside bar.
It really highlights that evolution, doesn't it? From, a more rural spot to this symbol of affluence.
Mm.
Though, as our source also points out, it later got this whole other reputation, right? As a big party district, especially for college students.
Right. That lively energy people associate with it. Okay, so let's dive into some of these historical landmarks then. The Swan House sounds really intriguing, not just old, but full of history.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is how this private home just transformed into such a major public landmark.
Okay.
It was built around 1928 for Edward Inman, big guy in the cotton industry, and his wife, Emily, designed by Philip T. Schutz, who is known for these grand, classical, Renaissance-style buildings. It was clearly a massive estate.
You can picture it.
And get this, it's even been used in TV shows and, more recently, the Hunger Games films.
Oh, wow, really? Talk about a historical backdrop that's also a Hollywood set.
Exactly. And then after Emily Inman passed away in 1965, the Surround House became home to the Atlanta Historical Society.
Which is now the Atlanta History Center, right?
Yeah, that's the one. It's on this big 30-acre property, National Register of Historic Places since 1977, Atlanta landmark building. The whole deal.
Impressive.
And it even houses artifacts that belong to Edward Inman himself. So you get this direct link to that early 20th century wealth and influence.
From cotton money to movies to preserving history, that's quite a life story for one building.
It really is.
Okay, now, another big one. The governor's mansion. It sounds like putting it in Buckhead was a pretty intentional choice.
Yeah, I think if you look at Buckhead growing in importance, putting the governor's mansion on West Paces Ferry Road makes a lot of sense.
Right.
It replaced an older one in Ansley Park. This one, Georgia's third official mansion, was really designed for entertaining, projecting an image.
State power, prestige.
Exactly. The official website mentions the ground floor is full of lavish furnishings picked out by this huge 70-member fine arts committee.
70 members. Wow.
Yeah, so putting this symbol of the state in a prominent growing area like Buckhead seems deliberate. And you could actually tour it a few days a week, which is cool.
Offers a glimpse into that history. It's like saying, this is where things happen in Georgia. Okay, let's shift a bit. What about the lodge at Peachtree Heights Park? Now Rivers Elementary. Sounds more community-focused.
Yeah, this brings up how different kinds of places shape a neighborhood, right? Not just the grand estates.
Sure.
The land was initially acquired by the Rivers family. Actually, wait, the article notes a correction. It was the Collier family.
Oh, okay.
Which makes sense because you have West and East Wesley streets named for them.
Gotcha.
But historically, the lodge was a real community hub. hosted dance classes, and importantly, Mrs. Bloodworth's kindergarten.
Oh,
Yeah, apparently attended by a lot of people who later became, movers and shakers in Buckhead.
wow, early connections.
Totally.
Oh,
Fascinating to think about those foundations being laid in what's now a public elementary school. Atlanta Public Schools owns it now, still used for community meetings.
amazing how those everyday places leave such a mark. Okay, switching to entertainment history. The Buckhead Theater. Sounds like it had a bit of a comeback.
It really did. It was originally known as the Roxy.
It's a Rossi, right?
Then it got this major restoration in 2010, thanks largely to Charles Loudermilk, and boom, back as the Buckhead Theater.
And it hosts big names.
Oh, yeah. Mumford and Sons, Gavin DeGraw, Keyshaw mentioned. It really shows Buckhead's role not just as a place to live, but a cultural hub, too.
And the fact they restored it says something.
Definitely. Shows that desire to hold on to those historical anchors.
Yeah. So, education, government, entertainment, Buckhead's showing its layers. Now, let's talk about a place that sounds like it's seen a lot of life. The 5 Paces Inn.
Yeah.
Longest running bar.
That's what the source says. And what's interesting is its staying power and just the mix of people it pulls in.
Okay.
Reportedly opened in 1955. It's not a huge place, under 2,800 square feet, but it's become this, institution. The description paints this picture, Gray-haired regulars with their dogs, Greek life kids, real estate folks, high-powered bankers, everyone.
Quite the mix.
Totally. It's your classic dive bar, smoky atmosphere apparently. Has a history as a hangout for rugby players after games.
Huh. Okay.
It's expanded a bit into next-door units over time, and there are these legends about patrons getting physically shown the door after closing time.
Adds to the charm, I guess.
Maybe. It definitely stands out against some of the newer, maybe more polished places around there. A real survivor keeping its character.
Absolutely. Now let's go even further back. Sardis United Methodist Church. Its history seems really woven into Buckhead's development.
Deeply woven, yeah. This really drives home that Buckhead's history goes way, way back before its modern image took hold.
Right.
The congregation's been on that exact site since at least 1812, maybe earlier.
1812, wow.
Yeah. The current building is from 1925-27, but it started as a log cabin, one of Atlanta's oldest congregations.
Incredible.
It got official legal recognition in 1848 after a courthouse fire. And interestingly, Henry Irby himself, Mr. Buckhead, sold them the land, along with ransom gain.
The founder again.
Yep. And the congregation grew so big that by 1961, a bunch of members actually left to start St. John UMC nearby.
Huh.
Its location, just south of Chastain Park, really roots it in that landscape, too.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? Community, faith being central to Buckhead for so long. Okay, the article also mentions the Cotton Exchange building, not much detail there, and then the State Bank Amphitheater at Chastain Park, another big entertainment venue.
Huge. Built in 1944 on this massive 268-acre park.
Which wasn't always Chastain Park.
Right, it was originally North Fulton Park.
Yep.
Renamed in 45 for Troy Chastain, a park supervisor.
Okay.
And it holds the title of Atlanta's oldest music venue. Pulls in over 200,000 people a year.
Wow. Who's played there?
The list is legendary. Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, Stevie Wonder, Willie Nelson, Aretha Franklin. I mean, tons of huge names.
Seriously iconic.
And it's evolved, Started with just simple bleachers and a band shell. Now it holds 7,000 people. Really shows Buckhead as this major destination for big shows for decades.
Like, Buckhead's been providing Atlanta's soundtrack. Okay, and finally, let's touch on the New Hope African Methodist Episcopal Church. Its origins sound really significant, tied to a major moment in history.
Yeah, this is a really crucial piece of the story. Highlights the diversity of Buckhead's communities and its connection to the post-Civil War Reconstruction era.
How so?
It was established right after slavery ended, on land actually donated by a white farmer, James Smith.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, for the purpose of building a church and a school for the local black community. It really represents the growth of black institutions in the South back then.
Right.
The current building isn't the original, maybe the second or third on the site, but it's housed a strong black congregation since they got control of the property in 1872.
Wow.
The original church sadly burned down in 1927, but the community rebuilt finished the basement first, then the main sanctuary in 1965.
Resilient.
Absolutely. It's this quaint wood-framed church on Arden Road, kind of surrounded by houses now. But it, along with its cemetery, was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2009, really recognizing its deep historical and cultural importance.
So putting all these places together, We get this sense of Buckhead's journey, rural roots, commerce, entertainment, diverse communities. But then we hear about this wild days period in Buckhead Village. What was that all about?
Yeah, that marks a big shift in Buckhead's identity.
Yeah.
It just exploded as this major nightlife hub.
Right.
We're talking maybe 100 bars and restaurants crammed into a pretty small area, like 2.5 blocks around Peachtree and Farrer Roads.
100. Wow, that sounds intense.
Super lively.
Mm.
The source compares it to Austin's 6th Street, but maybe more compact and less focused on live music bands, more just nightlife.
Gotcha.
Someone named Carter, who was apparently involved back then, described it to the New York Times as Bourbon Street at the entrance to Bel Air.
That paints a picture. Intense nightlife rubbing up against serious wealth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Captures that contrast. There's even mention of this, like, maybe infamous 1985 video called One Night in Buckhead
Oh.
that supposedly showed some of that energy.
Mm.
But yeah, the general feeling, according to the source, was that it eventually just got too wild.
Too wild for Buckhead,
Yep.
which still has a rep for nightlife. So what changed things? What prompted a shift?
Well, the article points to Jamestown acquiring the district in 2019 as a really big turning point.
Jamestown, okay.
They rebranded it, dropped the shops Buckhead Atlanta, just went with Buckhead Village, and they started this like concerted effort to reshape its image,
Oh, so.
bringing in new tenants, reporting strong sales by 2022. They started hosting more community-type events, like the Atlanta Christkindl Market.
Shifting the vibe.
Definitely. The article even contrasts the past, mentioning lethal fish bowls of drinks at places like Lulu's with the present, offering German Glühwein at the market.
Right, from fish bowls to Glühwein.
Suggests a deliberate move towards a different kind of experience, maybe a different crowd. Trying to move away from that wild reputation, cultivate something more curated.
Sounds like a really intentional rebranding, a new chapter for that part of Buckhead. Okay, now, our other source takes us in a different direction. Homicide trends in Atlanta, 1985 to 1994. That's a pretty significant period. How does this fit in?
Yeah, it provides this really important, broader context for the social landscape of Atlanta during a time that lines up with the rise and maybe the peak of that wild Buckhead Village era we just talked about.
Okay.
This is from an NIJ research report, National Institute of Justice. They looked at homicide trends, causes, policy impacts in 8 big U.S. cities. Atlanta was one.
And nationally, what was happening then? Early 90s?
Nationally, homicide rates were still pretty high compared to the mid-'80s.
Yeah.
This study really wanted to look at cities with different trends to figure out, what might actually work in tackling violent crime.
Right. So what did they find specifically for Atlanta during that 85 to 94 window?
Interestingly, they found what they called a decreasing quadratic trend for Atlanta's homicide rate.
Okay. What does that mean in plain English?
Basically, it means the rate didn't just go straight up or straight down. Instead, it hit a peak somewhere in that decade and then started to decline.
Ah, okay. So it went up, then down.
Exactly. The study shows it visually in their charts. While the overall trend wasn't like a simple straight line down, the rate did peak and then decrease.
Gotcha. Any numbers?
Yeah, the average homicides per year was around 135. Average rate was about 48 per 100,000 people. And, important note, Atlanta's population actually decreased by about 7% during that same time.
So while Buckhead Village might have felt like it was getting wilder, the city's overall homicide trend was peaking and starting to fall. That's a fascinating contrast.
It is.
Did the study offer any clues about why, what factors might have been playing a role in Atlanta's trends?
Well, the study was mainly looking cross-city, but some findings touch on local stuff. Like, they saw an increase in guns being used in homicides in all 8 cities, including Atlanta.
Right.
It also mentioned a perceived effectiveness. So people involved thought these things were working.
Okay, perceived.
Yeah. Things like problem-oriented policing, policing in public housing, task forces working across jurisdictions, and domestic violence programs. Community policing was still pretty new then, so they couldn't really assess its impact in this study. And they suggested that looking deeper, like at specific census tracts within the city, might show more about how economic factors played into it.
Makes sense. It's always complex, rarely one single cause. Now, we also had a brief mention of a WSB TV gallery of unsolved homicides in Atlanta and a Wikipedia list of unsolved cases from the 80s and 90s. How do those fit in?
They're really just a sobering reminder, While we're talking about Buckhead's changes and citywide stats, there's this real ongoing history of violence, cases that remain unsolved, impacting families, communities.
Right.
The WSB Gallery gives that local snapshot. The Wikipedia list gives a broader view, shows unsolved murders weren't unique to Atlanta during that period, obviously. Happened everywhere.
Yeah.
It just underscores the complexity of crime and the lasting scars it leaves on a place.
Absolutely. So bringing it all together, we've got this picture of Buckhead constantly changing its buildings, its identity, the nightlife scene, all happening against this backdrop of wider city crime trends. How do we connect these threads?
Well, if you step back, you could see the effort to rebrand Buckhead Village, move away from the wild image.
Oh.
Maybe that's part of broader urban development trends, right? And a response to safety concerns, even if there's no direct statistical link shown here to those homicide trends we discussed.
Yeah.
It suggests a community actively trying to shape its identity, its appeal. Ultimately, understanding Buckhead means looking at all these layers: the rural start, the big institutions, the rise and reshaping of the party district, all within the context of Atlanta's broader social story and crime picture.
It really shows, doesn't it? Even a place you think you know well has these deep, fascinating histories when you actually dig into the sources.
Absolutely.
So what are the key takeaways then as we wrap up this deep dive into Buckhead's story?
Well, we traced Buckhead's journey.
All right.
Right. From that literal Buckhead beginning to this diverse district with major historical landmarks.
Yeah.
We explored that whole era of Buckhead Village nightlife, the wild days, and the recent push to rebrand it.
And the crime context.
And we looked at it all against that backdrop of Atlanta's homicide trends during a really pivotal decade. It shows how interconnected these things can be.
It really does. It just goes to show how much depth, how much surprise you can find, even in familiar places when you really unpack the information. And on that note, maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. How do the physical spaces of a neighborhood, the buildings, the street layouts, the bars, the parks, how do they actually influence its culture and its reputation?
Yeah, and how do those perceptions and the reality on the ground change? It's sometimes really dramatically over time.
Maybe it'll get you thinking about similar changes in your own community, or maybe exploring the rich history of Atlanta and Buckhead even more.